Gentlemen, I'm very happy to have you here today. We're going to talk about authentic leadership. And whenever I discuss authentic leadership with different people, I realize how differently people also perceive this topic. First, people say, well, authenticity, that's about being yourself, isn't it? And leadership, well, you're all leaders, so isn't it just doing my job and being myself? In fact, there's a lot more behind the topic of authentic leadership. And I will share a few definitions with you from experts later today. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mette Johansson. I'm an author, I'm a keynote speaker, and I run a training consultancy called MetaMind Training. I'm from Denmark, although I lived in 11 different countries, and I am currently based in Singapore. 5 years ago, I found myself in a position where I was not very motivated or engaged or inspired at work. Perhaps you can relate to it. I got up in the morning, the alarm clock rang, and I thought, oh God, I gotta go to work. Dragged myself to work, and during work, the hours felt extremely long, really long. In the evening, I felt myself like a piece of electrical equipment, where the electrical cable was just pulled out of the wall and I was off. And it was very ironic because I had studied engagement and motivation and inspiration since my thesis that I did during my MBA studies for 20 years. I decided that this was not a very sustainable situation and I resigned. And since then, I have studied a lot of cases on people who are not very engaged, and I took myself as my first case study. This has slowly but surely developed into the concept that I'm talking about today, authentic leadership. I have summed it up in a program that I call Unmask the Leader Within. If we look at different experts, how they define the topic of authentic leadership, let's start with Bill George. Bill George is probably one of the largest authorities on the topic of authentic leadership. He's the ex-CEO of Medtronic, a US-based company, and what he says is, authentic leaders have discovered their true north. They align people around a shared purpose and values and empower them to lead authentically to create value for all stakeholders. What Bill George is focusing on very much is about this leading with a purpose for the greater good. So it's not just about being yourself. It's not just about being genuine. There has to be an element about leading for the greater good as well. Let's look at somebody who is, in my view, a much better expert. This woman, Carissa Thacker, she has written a book that is called The Art of Authenticity, and definitely worthwhile a read. She says, truly authentic leaders are people who know how to make sure the stuff that really matters gets done and raise the performance of thousands of people to a higher standard through their presence, impact, and well-chosen actions. She focuses on that it is about inspiring others to perform. Inspiring others to perform. In my program, Unmask the Leader Within, I have put together 7 different steps that to me are essential if you want to develop authentic leadership in organizations, starting with yourself. It starts with having a very high self-awareness. It's about knowing your strengths. It's about knowing your values. Most of you probably have a very good self-awareness about what are you good at. You've probably done some personality testing, and you probably have had loads of feedback over the years. You've had successes, so you know what you're good at. However, do you also know your values? Think about it for a moment. Do you know what your personal values are? Values in the sense of what is it in life that's the most important to you? Who in here can mention their 3 or 5 top personal values? Can anybody do that in here? 1 person? 2? Now this is already much above average from a corporate setting. Very frequently, when I talk to 50 people, there's not one single person raising their hands. Or perhaps one person reaches up in the air, and when I ask what are your values, they talk about the corporate values rather than their personal values. Values are not spoken much about in today's society. And unfortunately, this is what drives us. This is what motivates us. This is what makes us engaged. So it's very worthwhile having a little bit of a look at what is truly important to you in your life and base your life around this. The second step in the corporate world is about knowing what your own values are and then aligning it to the corporate values. What are the values of the organization that you work for? If you're in a leadership position, which all of you in here today are, then the loop goes back. You also look at your team members. What are their strengths? What are their values? And how do we align their values to what we want to achieve in our organization? The third step is communicate the vision and the values. It's living it on a daily basis. And how often are we experiencing in the corporate world that a new strategy or a new vision is rolled out in the company? There's a big communications campaign, there might be a town hall meeting, there might be some screensavers with a new slogan, there might be a little gadget that we can put on our tables that is supposed to communicate the new vision, the new strategy. That doesn't work. It's living it on a daily basis. The fourth step is daring to be yourself. Because one thing is being yourself at home with your loved ones. Another thing is daring to be yourself at the office in a corporate environment. A lot of people feel that they're being too vulnerable, that they show weakness if they're too much of themselves in a corporate world. This is not the case. The next step is about developing a deep respect for others. If we look back at Bill George's definition of authenticity, which talks about a purpose for the greater good, if you have a purpose for the greater good, it must be based on a deep respect of others. Otherwise, you will perhaps be focusing more on yourself than on a purpose for the greater good, a purpose for the greater me, which some politicians seem to be following, rather than a purpose for the greater good. The next step is about following your true north. This is about dilemmas. When you have clarity about what are your values, you will still very often experience there might be a bit of a clash between the different values in your life. And how do you decide when you are faced with these dilemmas of value clashes? The next step sums it all up in modern leadership principles. It's about how can you be a leader, leading as a servant leader on human leadership principles. I would like you, instead of taking a Q&A session on how do we define authentic leadership, I would instead like you to discuss in pairs, what do authentic leaders do? So if you take a sheet of paper, for just a few minutes, in pairs, the two of you, the two of you, the two of you, and also two and two, discuss what do authentic leaders do and what don't authentic leaders do. Take a couple of minutes based on what you've heard right now, and then we'll take it in a group as a discussion. Yes, one question before we go there.
Definition for an authentic leader?
So the definition of authentic leaders that we've had right now, I have it on this slide. It is about being yourself, yes. However, there needs to be an aspect of leading with a purpose for the greater good. There's also the aspect, as Carissa Thacker said, of inspiring others to perform. And what I shared with you was also that it's about being true to your values. How can you make sure that you're also true to your values? Those are some of the principles of authentic leadership, and I would like you to discuss it in pairs based on the knowledge you have right now. What do authentic leaders do, and what don't they do? All right, go ahead.
Try to sell anything. Try to.
Okay, let's have a little bit of a sharing from what you've discussed. What were some of the points that were interesting that came up? Perhaps questions, perhaps realizations, or just sharing of what you've discussed?
I think your point about the personal value is really very important, but I think most leaders nowadays forget that the personal value is actually the source of the power that drives the whole business, the whole organization. Because the corporate value we can just copy from any textbook, but personal value is original, is genuine. You cannot imitate the personal value, and that's the part that is, I think, lacking in any mediocre company or business leader. So you can see that perhaps in a very outstanding leader that has that personal value.
Thank you. That's a very important point. Your personal values is a source of your drive. It's a source of your energy. When you adhere to that, when you listen to your personal values, you have a lot more energy to accomplish extraordinary things. And this is what we're very often disconnected from. It's what you experience still in larger owner-led companies. For instance, Facebook. Whatever you may think about Facebook, people that I work with at Facebook, they say that management is very value-driven. They discuss very openly with their teams, whenever there's a new project, how does this relate to our purpose? How does this relate to our vision? They're very open about it. They discuss it very much. They're very purpose-driven, very values-driven, and that's why the entire company is so successful, because it's owner-led, and the owners are getting energy from, in Facebook's case, connecting people. It's about connecting people. They strongly believe in this, and they live it on a daily basis. So thank you very much for this. I'll switch to the next table, then we may get back to you again. What about here? What the two of you discussed together? What was the most interesting point that you can share with everybody?
I think it was the same. We focused on shared values and personal principles, not personality.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yes, we had a long list of topics, but it's true that it's maybe easy to say I have to be sincere with my management ethics and my values, but we actually build up these values through our working environment.
Yes.
And we are influenced by the company in a way, right? And then which part we are actually following is not that obvious. We all became, now we have our own values through our career.
Yeah.
And it's easy maybe to follow these values nowadays because we reach this maturity. Right?
Yeah.
And but we know what not to do, not to be abusive on the other people. We know we have to have charisma. We know it's great if we can inspire others to perform, but that's our daily difficulties, right? So we try to always be on this two edge of the things, right? But that's not the ideal work. It's not that easy.
It is hard work, and it's not necessarily possible to be authentic every single day. You're absolutely right. There's so many things that we try to please people that are coming into play. We try to please our bosses. We try to please our shareholders. There's so many different things that come into play here that is difficult to do on a daily basis. Thank you. What about the two of you? What were some of the points you came up with?
Being an authentic leader, really understanding in organizations for all the decisions and strategies that you have, compared with what not to do, what telling people to do, but get them understanding and get the buy-in on the whys strategies look like they are, and having the culture within that. If people don't agree or don't understand, they raise their hand and say, "I don't understand. You have to explain why."
Yeah.
Giving that to the organization to get them to perform. Because once
Right.
they believe in something, they'll go or drive in that direction than if someone is telling them.
When they believe in something, they will go in that direction. And their belief is, of course, based on their values. So we're back to the values that when you have a belief, you will be on autopilot to perform. You will be driven in the right direction. I hope that gives you a little bit more of an idea what we speak about when we mention authentic leadership. And we will be doing a lot more discussions around it, so it will probably be clearer along the way what is authentic leadership and what is not authentic leadership. Before we get into that, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on why is it that authentic leadership has become so important right now? Why is it that today we speak a lot more on authentic leadership? I have a couple of suggestions. One of them is that the trust in leadership has fallen dramatically over the last few years. We don't trust our leaders anymore. Credibility in CEOs fell by 12 percentage points to 37% only. That's very, very little. That's shocking. That's shocking. So trust in leaders is declining, and as a human being, we want to trust people. That's a foundation on which we build relationships, on which we build business. We want to have more authenticity so we know that we can trust our leaders. Another point is that engagement is a real problem today. Are you aware of some of the surveys that have come out on the lack of engagement? According to various studies, it's about 60 to 70% of the workforce that are not engaged. Imagine, in your company, if you have 1,000 people working in your divisions, you will have how many people who are truly engaged? And you will have 300 people, 400 people who are not engaged. Not engaged or disengaged. Gallup has even more shocking numbers. Gallup did a study where it said that 87% of the workforce is not engaged. Now, we also know that engagement is actually quite a good idea because companies with highly engaged workforces outperform their peers by 147% in earnings per share. And more numbers from Harvard Business Review, one inspired employee can produce as much as 2.25 satisfied employees. I can very much relate to that because when I shared my personal story about how I was not very much engaged at work, I did not perform as much as I did during my times where I was my bubbly me, when I was my energetic, performant, bubbly me. It makes a big difference whether you're motivated, whether you're engaged, or whether you're not. Another explanation I have for why engagement is so important today is going back to Maslow, which we also discussed earlier today. Now, I know that in Thailand, the situation is a bit different. However, in the West, the bottom hierarchies of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety and physiological needs, we don't have to worry about it. Who in here ever worries about, am I going to get enough money to feed my family? We don't worry about that anymore. And as Maslow says, we only focus on the higher needs when the basic needs have been established. Now, where I'm from, my parents, they were born before the war, and they knew hardship. They were born during times where safety was not taken for granted. There was a war. Food was not always there. And I'm sure that you can also tell stories from your parents, perhaps even yourselves, have had more hardship when you were younger than what your children have today. Children today, they grow up in a society, at least in the developed world, and I assume that for most of you this is also true, they grow up where those two layers are completely gone. There's no worry about food, there's no worry about shelter, about safety. So automatically, you focus on the higher level needs. Automatically, you focus first on the love and belonging, the esteem, and the self-actualization. And you can only have self-actualization if you know what your self is. And your self is based on your values. That's why authentic leadership based on leading from your values is so important today. There are lots of media reports on how millennials will want to have a higher purpose. This article from the Wall Street Journal says, I don't have a job, I have a higher calling. I don't have a job, I have a higher calling. You see from various studies also that millennials, they will forego a job with a high pay for something that they truly believe in. That is society today. We're focusing much more on self-actualization, which we will get through living our values. To sum this up, we have the fact that we are hungry for leaders who we can trust. We want to have leaders who we can trust. And looking inside ourselves, we're also looking for fulfillment through purpose in our life, based on our values. I believe that that is why it's very important to live for purpose, for the greater good in today's society. Being authentic is, of course, a challenge. We discussed it already before. Now, there are also different levels on which you can be authentic. And in the next exercise, I would like you to take a few almost case studies and discuss again. Is this authentic? Is this not authentic? I have a couple of slides, and I'll just go through the first one. I will distribute them to you so you can discuss it in groups. So the first slide, for instance, is behaving according to your roles authentic? What I mean by that is, most of us are probably parents. Do we show that at work life? If you have a role as parent, can you be authentic at work and not mentioning that you're also a parent? How does that relate together, being a parent at work and being a professional person at work? I have a couple of different case studies and discuss this for a few minutes, and then we will share in the team so we can get a better understanding of what is authenticity.
I know myself. I accept
in critical situations. But that is
Okay, let's share a little bit in the big group. The first question, is behaving according to your roles authentic? You're a marathon runner, or you love your dog, or you like to go to rave parties, or you're a parent, whatever. How are you going to deal with having different roles in different parts of your life? Do you have to show everything at the same time? Is it being authentic? Or how do you deal with that under the umbrella of authentic leadership? What did you discuss?
Well, I have an example from real life, not the rave parties, but I like live music. And a number of my staff, I knew that they would love to go to that concert that I was going to the next weekend, but I also knew that they couldn't afford it. And it's like how to balance that, and really being, I'm looking so much forward to this concert, but I can't really, could I say it or can't I say it? Will it dismotivate people or will it motivate them? I think that was some of the things that I was considering at that time.
Thank you. You also have a...
self-control is a part of ability of leader.
Self-control, yes.
That is clearly an ability.
Absolutely.
But however, okay, if I agree, in Russia, I need to show that.
Yeah.
Okay, in Russia, you need to show your emotion.
Yeah.
Okay, but in Thailand, it's clearly a weakness.
I would not do so. Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
When
Absolutely. Yeah. So to finish off about your different roles, yes. With the roles, it's not so much about being transparent and showing all aspects, all parts of your life all the time. To me, the answer is again going back to values. For instance, if you're a parent, you have some parenting principles that are also based on your values. For instance, for me, learning is very important to me. That's why I run a training consultancy. And as a parent, learning is also one of my very fundamental guiding principles. So if I want to be authentic, I live this both as a parent and also in my professional life. So it's not necessarily about saying, oh, I'm a loving parent and showing that in my professional life. No, I don't have to. However, I do base my life on a fundamental part, which is learning, and that I live everywhere. So it's not necessarily about showing I'm this, I'm a music lover, I'm a parent, I'm what have you. You don't necessarily need to show that every single time in different situations.
If I might ask a question, how do you display weakness or an area that you're processing in a way that is not scaring employees or making them feel, oh crap, if he's not good at that area, how can I?
Right. So weaknesses, it sounds like you're almost talking a bit about, also talking about fear. If you're a bit fearful about the situation, if you have certain weaknesses. Now, it really much depends on the situation, as you were also saying, on the environment. Showing weaknesses is not necessarily a bad thing. However, it depends on how you deal with it. If you have found a solution for it, it's absolutely all right to have weaknesses. It's going back to the self-awareness, the first step in my 7-step process. If we are aware of our strengths and weaknesses, we can be much more effective as leaders. We can find people who do things that compensate for our weaknesses in our life. A very easy example is to see we have right and left hands. There's no reason for us to focus on becoming very good writers with our left hand if we're right-handers. It doesn't make sense. It's not an optimal use of your time, and there's lots of other people, other ways where we can do the same thing without you forcing to work on your weaknesses. So in a more realistic work scenario, showing your weaknesses, if you're very comfortable with them, it's very easy also to show it to other people. For instance, one of my weaknesses is I'm not very good at calling people, cold calling. And I've been very clear with my team, I'm not good at cold calling, I need somebody to back me up to do this. I have hired a business development manager who's very good at it so that I don't have to deal with this part of it. And that doesn't necessarily make me look weak as a leader, does it? I'm just very realistic about what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And my team really respects me for it as well, that I don't pretend to be good at everything, that I also respect them. You're good at that, so why don't you do that part? I'm good at other things, and that's what I will take the responsibility for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Good. We had another question, which was about behaving according to your feelings, whether that was authentic. You already said no. If you are in Thailand and you feel angry, there's no way that you will show anger. Now, is this being authentic, though, if you feel angry and you don't show it? What is your take on that? Is it inauthentic to hide that you're angry?
I keep my energy and go running outside.
Exactly. It's about emotional intelligence. If you feel angry, you better learn to deal with your emotions. You need to learn to manage your feeling. Anger management in this situation.
Internal
role
play.
That's right, that's right. So learning to deal with anger doesn't make you inauthentic. It simply makes you a higher emotional intelligent being.
I think the difference in Thailand or some other places is just the way that your disapproval is expressed. So probably in the West, it's okay to say you messed up and you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
But if you phrase it the same, then it's probably going to be different. But if you're more tranquil, maybe the approach is different.
And that is exactly the next slide I have. Is adapting to cultures being inauthentic? In my view, absolutely no. It's not inauthentic to adapt to other cultures. Sorry, that was a double negative there. You can be authentic whilst adapting to cultures, because this is on a behavior level. It's playing on a very superficial level of your behavior. We'll look at that in a moment. If we are living according to our values, for me, for instance, respect is a very important part of my life. And if I respect you, whatever culture you're from, then I'm still being very authentic. Whether I give my business card with 2 hands, or whether I don't know the rule yet and I just give it with 1 hand, that doesn't necessarily make me disrespectful. Yes, in the culture it does. However, if people can feel that I'm making an effort to accommodate your cultural behavior, and I learn along the way, and next time I do it with 2 hands, then I will be appreciated for showing respect. If they can see that I am asking questions to you because I want to get to know you, if I show respect on other levels, then the behavioral part of giving a name card with 1 hand or 2 hands is forgiven. Because values is a much more deeper part than behavior, and we'll see this on a slide in a few moments. So yes, you can be absolutely authentic, you can be yourself, and adapting to other cultures that are not necessarily you. Another question we have, is behaving according to your weaknesses authentic? I believe we had that over here. What did you come up with?
We talk about the self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Yes, because of the majority of people, they don't know themselves about weaknesses. This is my weaknesses. Or even they know, but they do not accept it. And they don't want to show this kind of thing to other people.
Yeah. Very often people use, oh, I'm not very good at this, as an excuse for not trying harder, for not trying to step out of their comfort zone. And of course, stepping out of the comfort zone, you step into your growth zone. The example I've used here, I'm shy, so I'm a leader, I'll just close my door. I won't make myself so openly available to everybody else because I don't like it. Now that doesn't work as a leader. If you are shy, if you're an introvert as a leader, you are a leader and you need to step out into your growth zone, out of your comfort zone, and develop your extrovert part of you as well. Characteristics and weaknesses, there's always a little bit of a span. As I mentioned, the example of writing with my left hand. Of course I can write with my left hand. It's not going to be beautiful, but if I practice, I will get better. So again, if you have weaknesses, it's not an excuse for behaving in a certain way, because there is a span of our characteristics, of our personality, what we can develop. Introversion, extroversion is a very good example of that. We can become more extrovert. There are great introvert salespeople on this planet. There are great introvert speakers, public speakers on this planet. So it shouldn't be an excuse for what behavior you're going to exhibit. This one you don't have in your groups. Fake it till you make it. It's an expression about do something till you become something. What do you think about this in the context of being authentic? Is it okay to fake it till you make it? It's very often used in terms of do something like, for instance, public speaking. Just pretend you're confident and you will become confident. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's where there is this limit with authenticity, because if you fake it, you are going to maybe succeed, but then you are not authentic to your values. Right? So if you maybe reach this next stage, this level maybe is good for you, but it's not what you are. Maybe we select some weaknesses that we admit, so the team will maybe regard you maybe as a honest person. There are some other weaknesses you don't like to talk about. Right? And that's where maybe you try to fake it a little bit because you want to cover it up.
Okay.
So it's not easy to be authentic. I mean, that's
No, we can establish this very quickly. It's not easy to be authentic. You will be faced with challenges all the time. So you're saying in certain situations you will pretend, however, it's not being authentic.
It's difficult to be 100%.
Yeah, yeah. Any other comments to fake it till you make it, whether it's authentic or not?
Depends on what you're faking.
Depends on what you're faking.
If you're faking, I'm being confident as a speaker, even though I'm not. I'm stepping on a comfort zone and growing. But if I'm faking my true beliefs, my core values, that's never going to be sustainable.
Exactly. Thank you very much for that. That is exactly the takeaway that I want you to have from this. It's okay to pretend to be confident. If you're facing a crisis situation at work, you better show that you're confident about where we're going to go. Because if a factory is burning somewhere and you are in charge, you better not show that you're scared about the situation. You better not share with your team that you're not confident about what's going to happen. So in situations like that, yes, it's going back to your core values. You don't want everybody to be panicked. Most people don't want that for their teams. Otherwise, I'm not sure whether you're in a leadership role in the beginning. So of course, you want the best for the people, and the best for the people in that situation is that you show confidence, that you show leadership, that you show that you know what's going on, although you are scared inside. So those are some of the dilemmas that we very often discuss when we're talking about authentic leadership. To me, it is very nicely summed up with this iceberg, where I talked about behavior is on a very superficial level. Behavior is what we demonstrate. However, there's so much more under the surface. An iceberg model is what psychologists use to describe our personality. Have you seen this model before? It's quite famous. So on the bottom, you usually have personality traits. And a lot of psychologists say that this never changes over time. Now, I'm not so sure about that. I am not a psychologist. I don't want to argue with the experts. Instead, I've just called it DNA, because I know that our DNA doesn't change. So the bottom of the iceberg is our DNA. Going a little bit higher, it will be our values. And that is, to me, some of the most fundamental part of our personality, our values. Based on our values is where our beliefs are. To me, our beliefs are on a higher level, on a more superficial level. They're based on our values. We've got our attitude, our feelings, our capacities, what we can do and what we can't do. And all the way on the top is the behavior. So going back to some of the case studies we had just now about, do you adapt to different cultures? Of course you do, because this is simply just behavior that you're showing. However, what you don't compromise on is what's much further down, and it's your values. Does that make sense? Now, how do you discover your values? 3 different ways of doing it. First of all, it's reflecting yourself, so asking yourself, going inside yourself, and discussing what is the most important thing in my life. The second way of doing it is to talk to somebody who knows you well. And the third way of doing it is getting an expert, getting an external coach who can help you find out about this. I would like you to get a little bit of a feeling for it today, so we're going to do an activity on this. Are you open to do an activity right now? Yes. On your tables, there's a little stack of white cards, the center of the table. I would like each of you to take 5 cards. Randomly take 5 cards and pass on the stack to the next person. So it's important you have 5. That's how the exercise works best. In a moment, I would like you to stand up and exchange cards. So the way it works is that you have 5 cards. You select the 2 that are the most important to you. Intuitively, check the words, the concepts, and take the 2 that are the most important to you. Then you have 3 cards that you can get rid of. You can exchange them with other people. Meaning you get 5 cards. Sorry?
Keep 2.
You keep 2. The most important that intuitively, the other 3 you exchange with other people in the room. And you keep on doing this for a couple of minutes. Every time you get new cards, you look again at your 5 cards. Which ones are the 2 most important? So you will reevaluate all the time. So do it as quickly as possible, because that's when you get as many different concepts, words written on your cards. So you can get a little bit of a reflection. Do use your intuition, though. Do use your intuition. If you think too much about it, there will not be enough time for this exercise. Any questions to the exercise? Get up, stand up, walk around. Feel free to stand up. There's much more space at the back.
Okay.
Now, to get to the next level, we would need a lot more time. This is only going to be your first taste for what are actually your personal values. On your hands, you will probably have 2 or 3 concepts, 2 or 3 words that give an indication of what are your values.
I have too much hope.
You have too much hope. You got too much hope.
Yeah.
Now, 2 or 3 of those, I would recommend you to have a think about it sometime, perhaps tonight, perhaps over the weekend. Think a bit about how do you define these concepts? Why are they important to you? How do you align those to the corporate values? How do you live those on a day-to-day basis? So reflect a little bit on those, what it means to you in your life. To me, whether intuitively or by design, effective leaders, they live a purpose for the greater good based on their inner values. And those are what you got an indication of right now. And this is what you can further develop if you follow the 7-step framework that I shared with you earlier. When you have done this for yourself, the next step is to also do this for your team members. Because when your team members have values in their life that they live, perhaps even have a purpose, they will get a lot closer to fulfillment. When they are fulfilled, it means that they have a lot more energy. As we mentioned in the beginning, energy is, or values, is a source for the energy that you have in your life. And that I can personally also confirm it's absolutely true. I shared with you how I felt out of energy in my corporate job that I resigned from 5 years ago. When I built up my own businesses, I found sources of energy that I didn't even know that I had inside myself. I have written 1 book. I am writing a 2nd book. I am a contributor to the Huffington Post. I have built 2 profitable businesses over the past 4 years. I am absolutely loving what I'm doing because I'm building my life based on what's truly important to me. On top of all this, I do more sports than I ever did. I socialize more. I go out for a lot more networking events. And I have much more time to read books than I did before. This is because I'm tapping into the energy that's inside of me. I'm releasing the passion that drives me to do all these things. On top of what I've all mentioned, I probably work about 10 to 20 hours a week on a non-profit initiatives. I am working on bringing more women to stages around the world, which in the beginning I thought, this sounds too big, bringing women speakers to stages around the world. However, it's happening. I launched a directory for women speakers in December in Asia. And already now, it's going from Asia to the world because somebody in Europe asked me, hey, this is such a good initiative. I want to copy this in Europe. Can I do this together with you? So from me thinking, oh, the world sounds a little bit too much of a chunk for me to bite, it's happening. I have a team of 17 volunteers who are working together with me because I communicate my purpose. I keep on saying we want to bring more diversity to stages because diversity increases group intelligence. I communicate this over and over again. I attract people who want to do this together with me because it's based on their intuitive value system. And all of a sudden, amazing things can happen. That is exactly what's happening to me in my life right now today. So the energy that it's releasing also means that we're increasing engagement. We saw the appalling numbers in the beginning of the presentation. This you can change if you have a purpose that you're leading for. And finally, somebody mentioned it from the beginning, happiness. Very important to have happiness at work. Companies with high level of happiness are 25% more profitable than companies with low happiness levels. It's part of what we want to do as human beings. We are more engaged, more fulfilled when we're happy. Living and communicating your purpose was the next step on the 7-step framework. Very quickly, how do you live it on a daily basis? It's about repeating, repeating, and repeating it. It's about making it relevant for the people, making sure that whenever you start a new project, you show what's the big picture. How does this fit with our values? It's about telling stories, how you have lived this. And it's about being enthusiastic, being passionate about it. Authentic leadership, we've mentioned it a few times, living it on a daily basis is very hard. You will be faced with dilemmas. Even when you have found out what is your value system, where you have a few words right now on some cards, there will be challenges. For instance, if you as a leader have been asked to fire your team, perhaps your value is transparency, perhaps it is loyalty. Now, who are you going to be loyal to? Your team or the top management who says, this is what we're going to do? And how do you deal with your value of transparency when you're faced with a decision of you will have to fire a lot of people going forward? So being authentic, living your values on a daily basis is not necessarily easy. However, being fake, not being yourself, is not necessarily easy either. That can also be very draining. because it's the values that energize you. I'd like to leave you with one last thought, which is about charisma. Are charismatic leaders authentic? Is that linked? Being charismatic and being authentic, is that linked?
Some people, yes.
In some cases, some people, yes. And that is, in my opinion, because charismatic leaders don't have to be authentic. However, if you are authentic, very often you have that energy. You are a very congruent person. You're seen as being consistent. And you are showing that energy that's based on your passion. When you're demonstrating this, you will be a lot more charismatic along the way. And we're drawn to charismatic leaders. So with that, thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you very much.